The Fisker Ocean was the worst car I've ever reviewed. It still is, and that's what I called the video.
I think we owe Marques Brownlee an apology. Hold up, before you beat me up, just hear me out. So Marques Brownlee, if you don't know who he is a very prominent YouTuber who has roughly about 18 million followers. Now, he primarily focuses on technology as well as automobiles. And so roughly about 2 months ago, he gave a review titled The Worst Car I've Ever Reviewed, which was a Fisker Ocean. Now, the Fisker Ocean was supposed to be a competitor to the likes of the Mach-E, the Model Y, as well as the Kia EV9 at some degree. And the thing is that whenever a automotive journalist gives a review, it is really up to the person who is watching the review to take in their own insights. And in many cases, go test out the car for themselves if they're interested. But the weight of that reviewer has a huge amount of weight of influence to the masses. Shortly after, the decline of Fisker was not anything but inevitable. And the argument began to come up whether or not Marques Brownlee's review is the reason and downfall behind Fisker. In this video, I'm here because y'all know I like to give y'all the sauce. In this video, I wanted to explore the timeline of events because quiet as it's kept, Fisker has been on the downward spiral for quite some time, but I believe that Marques Brownlee's review brought a lot of light and attention to the subject matter, and a lot of us have not actually done our homework to really understand what happened. So in this video, I'm going to give you a few butterfly events and not just an analysis of his review, but more so an understanding of what has been going on probably for the last 15 years and why he was literally the straw that broke the camel's back. So with that being said, stick around and stay tuned because you are now watching The Breakdown. So getting into it, Fisker is a very small company based in California and was founded by Henry Fisker and Bernard Kohler back in 2007. The thing is that Fisker is a exclusively electric automobile company, which is essentially a startup. And given that they started around 2007, of course, this was right around the time of the housing crisis of 2008. That being said, the founder, Henry Fisker, kind of is not new to the automotive game. And there are a lot of parallels between him and John DeLorean, who started his company in the early 80s. And we all know how that story ended. And essentially, he went bankrupt shortly thereafter. The DeLorean is a cautionary tale of what we believe happens when someone has very ambitious dreams, but doesn't exactly know and understand how to run a business. Now, back to Henry Fisker, who is essentially the CEO and the driving force behind Fisker, was a departure from BMW and Aston Martin, as he had done both the Vantage V8 as well as the BMW Z8. Given that he has had a lot of automotive experience, he has not had a lot of automotive experience with mass market distribution vehicles. More importantly, the cars that he has worked with are extremely low volume. And so being that you have extremely low volume cars, you don't really have the best understanding of the real world on how automotive trends work. Aston Martin in specifics, if you haven't seen that video, which I did on James Bond, gave me a lot of enlightenment on why they are such a small company, but they're very niche. So when he left BMW to go start his own company, he knew that basically he wanted to create a very cool and sexy car because he thought many of the cars that were on the road were boring, and essentially want to give himself a pat on the back for starting something new and being a disruptor. Around the same time, this would also be a development for Tesla, as just a year later, shortly after Fisker was founded, Tesla was being led by Elon Musk, which we have seen the results of that today. Getting into it, Marques Brownlee around 2 months ago did a review on the Fisker Ocean. The Fisker Ocean, introduced roughly around 2019 at its debut, was highly anticipated because a lot of us had been waiting for more production models from Fisker, as Fisker had not really done the best job of delivering vehicles and is historically documented. I'm not gonna hold y'all. Fisker looked like somebody was touching the money and moving it around, but we're gonna get into that.
That's suspicious.
When Marques Brownlee initially gave his review, he did it on his channel AutoFocus, which primarily focuses on automobiles, not technology, which a lot of people know him for. Keep this in mind. EVs are technology. They go hand in hand. So If it seems like he was one off, he was not. In this review, he initially started off with some level of logistic issues, basically noting that he wanted a car from Fisker, but basically they could not offer him one at the time, and they was like, go find another one.
Get somebody else to do it.
And so that's what he did. So he ended up getting a Fisker Ocean from a Mitsubishi dealership. Now, I'm not gonna hold y'all, that was a red flag right there, but we're gonna leave that alone. So when he did the Fisker Ocean, he bought a used unit. Buying a used unit for a automobile review is not unheard of. Many of the great reviewers you're aware of today started their careers as working with used vehicles, so it's not unheard of. But the thing is that when you are doing a massive review and you're doing a really huge number of ears and eyes watching, it's oftentimes best to have your best foot forward. However, Fisker was not ready to let him review the vehicle because they were in the middle of a software update. Now, I have my own theory that they were really trying to clean up the mess behind the scenes, because it seems as though this is not the first time they do it. Consumer Reports had noted at one point back in 2012 that basically the car that they had received, going through the exact same logistics that Marques Brownlee went through, the car was DOA, and y'all know what I mean because I can't say it because it's YouTube. With that, Consumer Reports had to essentially have their car towed, and it was a $100,000 car. Back into Fisker, I'm going to tandem back into that. Back with Fisker, they had one car at the time, which was the Karma, and the Karma was a supercar supposed to compete with all the likes of the other supercars at the time, and it was upwards of $100,000. Now, this was back in 2012 when Consumer Reports looked at this vehicle and essentially said it's not worth a damn. This was really bad press. Going back to Marcus's review, he gave a very fair review of the car. Now, I noticed that this review was a matter of quirks and gimmicks, and this was more of a technological review, more so than a car review, because it focused less on the mechanics and more so on the tech and features of the actual car, with some inclusion of the mechanics and engineering of it. And if you know about cars, you'll know what I'm talking about. But anyway, Marques Brownlee said the car sucked.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
We're just gonna keep it above. I'm gonna go ahead and say this much. Language matters, and there is some level of thought that goes into our titles as YouTubers, and we have to think carefully about how we want to distribute that to you guys as the audience. I ain't gonna even hold y'all. The idea that he used certain keywords such as worst, which held true, and he stood on business when he said that.
The Fisker Ocean was the worst car I've ever reviewed.
It still is.
But by saying the worst automobile he's ever reviewed holds a lot of weight, given that he has 18 million followers. In his review, he essentially said that the car had a lot of potential, but it was not well developed. It was very clunky, and a lot of the engineering and ergonomics were not well structured to be considered a proper EV. Now, granted, this man has done over hundreds and hundreds of technological and automotive reviews, so this is not his first rodeo. Being that this is not his first instance, it made complete sense of why he gave his review, because he has a structure, he has a format, he has a premise, and he has a thing that he wants to say. To keep things fair, many other reviewers have said similar things, and this was the initial review because Fisker would come back and try to get a second attempt at redemption for their product. Now, this is very important. In the second automobile review, which was the 2.0 version of the software update, he said some things had improved. However, they were not that much better, and he stood on business when he said it sucked. The consensus from the masses was that Marques Brownlee's word, by saying that it was the worst automobile that he reviewed, pretty much bankrupted the company. As a smaller YouTuber, I can talk my shit because I hopefully will get just enough eyes on this. If I get too many eyes on this,
y'all follow me and subscribe.
But because of that, it gave weight to the idea that influencers or reviewers or whomever should not be able to get bad reviews because it can bankrupt companies. The problem with that is that not only is he not the first to say that, but do you guys want the Google reviews or what? Getting back into Fisker, because I think Marques Brownlee will kind of tie all of that in together. Fisker has been problematic for quite some time in the regard of financials. Back in 2009, they took out an automotive loan from the US government, and Henry Fisker has demonstrated that he's not exactly capable of properly managing the funds and the revenues that go in and out of the company. And this would not be the first time that Fisker would have gone bankrupt. Shortly thereafter, around 2012, they would file for bankruptcy the first time with the A123 batteries, also with the note that they could not pay the government back. The loan that they received back in 2011, 2012 2012 was a $529 million loan from the Department of Energy to help get the startup going and really get them focused on focusing on the trajectory that we were expecting to go towards, which we are today, where EVs and ICEs coexist. But the idea that Fisker was supposed to be a bigger company alongside Tesla has shown us that that's not exactly what happened. And back in 2012, they had only built 2,000 Karmas, but back then only maybe 2/3 of them had been built, but only 1/3 of them had been sold. And this kind of gives enlightenment to how Fisker has really been kind of shenaniganing this entire time. But we've seen this with many other techs and startups where they burn through the cash, and then cry bankruptcy because they burned through the cash. Now, whether you want to say it or not, it is fair to say that reviewers should be able to give reviews. But in my observations, one of the things that I noticed was that initially what happens is with these Fisker reviews is that they are oftentimes not PR ready. And because Fisker is a lesser known company, they can kind of go under the rug a little bit more and not deliver as well because it's such a small audience. But the Fiskers of the last 10 years have simply not delivered on the trajectory, which has ultimately led to them failing shareholders and essentially displaying that they are incapable of becoming a formidable automotive company. Now, in this particular review with Marques Brownlee, I noticed that there were several things that were kind of a misunderstanding. And one of the biggest things that Fisker has done, instead of making a solid engineered car, is essentially focus on a lot of gimmicks to give you the idea that this car is quote unquote cool. And in this review that Marques gave, and like I said before, it was more of a technological review, not necessarily an automotive review. And there was a lot of things that he was able to hone in on as opposed to just simply focusing on the style and the engineering. And the biggest complaint that Marques really had was simply that it was not a car that was ready, and he was really ready for it to be over. The idea that a reviewer should not be able to give an honest opinion is absurd at its best, because he's given an opinion, and his opinion, because it does have a lot of weight, he has to maintain a lot of integrity behind what he says. Now, I am not saying that he will not give a biased review. We all have our internal biases. That's just what happens. But from an observational standpoint, Fisker was not expecting him to give such a bad review to the point where it would affect the masses. Now, it is purely by coincidence that once he said that, the share price fell, but he did nothing but simply overlay what many other journalists and reviewers have said about the exact same car. And in his follow-up review shortly thereafter, about 6 days ago, at the time of this recording, he essentially said that the idea that we are to give reviews is mostly due to our responsibility to our audience. This is not the first time that Fisker has gone bankrupt. This is also not the first time that they have not had a product ready car. This is not the first time they have not delivered on their promises to their customers to be able to produce quality vehicles. And so the idea for many people to be able to say that he is responsible for the downfall of company and he should essentially be muted in certain degrees without saying anything negative is truly crazy. Leave a comment below and let me know if you've seen Marques' review and what you think about it. I'd be very curious to hear your thoughts and opinions, and whether or not it really does matter whether or not a big influencer gives their idea of whether or not a product is good or not. And do you really want to hear the truth from an influencer, or do you want to be sold on something? Because I believe ultimately that is what Fisker was hoping for, and that is not what happened. With that being said, until the next video, I will see you guys later.